We're so excited to have you with us today, and we'll begin our featured presentation shortly. My name is Nick Webster. I'm the Key Accounts Coordinator with Fear Free, and I will be your webinar host this afternoon. I want to thank you for joining Finessing a Fear-Free Stay, Safe Animal Handling. Presenting in just a few minutes will be Mikkel Becker, Fear Free's lead animal trainer and dog behavior counselor. Today's webinar is hosted by Fear Free Pets, where we take the pet out of petrified and put the treat back into treatment. Fear Free's mission is to alleviate fear, anxiety, and stress in pets by educating the people who care for them. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Fear Free Pets. For any pet parents in the audience, we also have Fear Free Happy Homes and the Happy Paws podcast. You can find us on social media at Fear Free Happy Homes, and you can access the Happy Paws podcast hosted by our presenter today, Mikkel Becker, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or at fearfreehappyhomes.com. Today's webinar is brought to you by our friends at Virox. As a thank you for attending, you can use the code FINESSE20 for 20% off your Fear Free membership or renewal. For anyone just logging in, I want to welcome you all to Finessing a Fear-Free Stay, Safe Animal Handling. As a reminder, there are two options on your Zoom controls, a chat feature as well as a Q&A feature. We'll have time at the end to address questions from the audience, so if you have a question, please use the Q&A box. A recording of tonight's presentation will also be available for all attendees within 2 weeks. Mikkel, we're so excited to have you here with us. So on that note, I'll pass it on to you and we'll get started.
Thank you so much, Nick, and thank you to everyone for joining. Today is going to be very video heavy, which I hope that you will enjoy. I know that I personally love learning through videos. It's super helpful to just really be able to see Fear Free in action. So please also note that a lot of the videos that I will be sharing, I also have up on YouTube if you want to see a fuller version of some of these. So you'll have some other follow-up resources as well. So some great handouts that will accompany everything that we're talking about. And you may have some drop-ins by some of my dogs here. This is Otis. So Otis will very much be a part of this, I think, as well. And so I'm sure a lot of you will also be able to have some of your pets, hopefully, too. So with that said, let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and get started. Huh, Ogie? Okay. Let's see here. There we go. Okay. So as I mentioned, definitely very video heavy. And what I want to talk about is, and really just show, are some of the signs of starting off with like fear, anxiety, and stress. So a lot of times pet owners and even us, we can get so almost immune to it where we don't realize it or recognize it unless it really escalates to the point where the pet is hiding. Maybe they won't come back with us to a kennel when they're boarding, or they're really hesitant to greet. But there are a lot of dogs that are suffering in ways that are maybe a little bit more quiet that we just may not notice as much. And it's really important to pay attention to those signs early on, because a lot of times once that fear has escalated, it becomes harder and harder and far more challenging to get them to take treats, to be able to enjoy those positives. And also it becomes a riskier interaction for us as well. So we really want to pay attention to those signs early on. So with that said, I want to show a dog in a typical waiting area. So this is at North Idaho Animal Hospital, which is a fear-free certified vet practice. This is Indiana Bones, by the way. He wanted up. They always know when I'm presenting, they get excited. So have to be right here with me. And so this is a lab right there at North Idaho Animal Hospital who was definitely starting to... Oh. Come here, Odie, come here. So this dog right here was really, they're starting to play fight. So this dog was starting to escalate with some of those signs of fear, anxiety, and stress, and nobody was really paying attention to him. So it's really important to start paying attention to those signs. So I want to go ahead and start with that. So what you see is some trembling there. We're doing some stress yawning, some blinking, that trembling, the lip licking. So these things that a lot of times we may not even notice. So it's really important that we do start attending to those things early on. So for this dog, for instance, some easy fixes for him are just giving him a non-slip surface. So giving him that nice yoga mat that he can sit on, being able to also, a lot of times too, pets are paying attention to things that we may not even realize. So scent, for instance, can make a big difference. So if there is any negative sense in that environment. So that's where it's really important to make sure that all of those surfaces are cleaned. So not only the floor, but also those walls, anything that pet really touches up against, that can make a big difference for them. Here's another example. This is a little pug in a hoarding situation where, unfortunately, there were, I think, 115 pugs and pug mixes seized in this hoarding and puppy mill situation in Arizona that I went to go help at. And a lot of them were really under socialized and, some really severe signs of fear, anxiety, and stress in a lot of them, but there were some that were more subtle. And here's one example of a really subtle sign that you might see sometimes in some dogs. So this dog, for instance, see, very slowed down, that low tail wag, the ears back, that hugging. So that's another sign that we may miss, is when that dog just really goes to their pet owner, they're like hugging them. That can be another big sign of that fear, anxiety, and stress that we may not even recognize. So really important to attend to that. So that's another sign. Here's an example of a dog named Chandler. So Chandler was a dog that I was working with at a veterinary hospital who was in boarding there. And one time when I came in to go see her, she was like this. You'll see the eyebrow furrow, the stress panting, very, very nervous, also hiding. So for her way of hiding is just hiding behind that door. So she wasn't comfortable coming out. So to me, that was a huge sign, like, wow, we really need to address this. So immediately talking with the vet there, and really important that if we do see these signs where a dog does start to escalate, that we have different avenues where we can help that pet. So in that situation too, whether it's, even if we aren't boarding in a veterinary facility, having those vet contacts on board, because maybe that dog isn't feeling well that day, or if they are having this severe fear, anxiety, and stress, we really do need to address that. And sometimes that can be adding in different things. So in some cases, nutraceuticals, in other cases, some pharmaceutical help can really be an important way to help address those things, as well as even looking at things like GI upset. Chances are for a lot of dogs, when they're stressed, they're going to have that major GI upset where they are, having that stress-related diarrhea, for instance, and that can be awful for the pet to go through, and it can be really hard for us too when we're caring for those pets. So those are some things we really do want to address, and also working with that pet parent beforehand on what things they can do for their pet before they even bring them in. So maybe they come in with some great probiotics, for instance, that are on board. So that can be one preventive way. But also attend to dogs when they are in that state, because a lot of dogs, they don't necessarily get really like shut down, and others can get really escalated. So I know that one of the common dogs you might see are the ones that get really hyperactive, really overly active, just moving like crazy. I know that for a couple of my pugs or pug mixes, they definitely are inclined to go that way, versus our big dog Nova, more of a lab pity. She's more the type that gets really quiet and more shuts down. So really paying attention to what the dog does, because a lot of times people might see a dog that is really hyperactive and they may think that hey, that dog is just really excited, but really attending to what are the other signs. Like, do they have a fear grimace where their lips are really pulled back? What are their ears doing? So seeing, is that really a sign of a happy dog, or is that dog potentially really stressed? So when we think about considerate approach, it's really important in all environments, and including in boarding. And when we talk about wanting to have that non-slip surface, that's also really important in boarding as well, because a lot of times one of the biggest stressors for a lot of dogs is that aspect of slipping and falling. So when a primal fear for animals is that fear of falling. So we want to ensure that they have a really secure surface, that their paws are stable, it's non-slip. Also making sure that those areas are really cleaned. So a lot of times when we are thinking of cleaning an area, we may think of using something that maybe has more scent and that smells really clean to us, but to a dog that can be really overwhelming and really overpowering. So we want to avoid things also like bleach, which can cause a pet, for instance, to go nose blind. So almost where it can hinder some of those nose molecules in their nose. So some of those scent receptors, it can really temporarily damage those, and it can leave them where, for a dog, for instance, or for a cat, their sense of smell is so important to them, far more important to them than any of their other senses. So when their sense of smell is hindered by something like bleach, that can be really scary, really frightening for them. So we want to ensure that we are using a cleaner that does thoroughly not only disinfect, but also that helps to remove those odors and those negative pheromones, because a lot of times pets too are attending to these pheromones in the environment that we may not even realize that other pets are giving off. So when for instance, when I'm in a veterinary hospital, in a boarding facility, it is ensuring that our clothes are clean, bringing that spare change of clothes in case we do need to change. Sometimes you may have those situations where, you may get something on your clothes. The pet may have an accident. We want to ensure that we are having those clean clothes. Also, wiping down your shoes. That might be something that you may not have even thought of. And that's something I've only thought of now that I've started to work with Fear Free, is really attending to, are my shoes actually clean? What am I tracking in? And a lot of times we are bringing so much more with us than we even realize. And same thing with any of the equipment that we use. Also any of those surfaces that pets rub up against. So they have a lot of different scent glands in different areas where they release those pheromones. Anything the pet is rubbed up against, sat on, walked on, those are important things that we clean. And so for me, definitely, and through Fear Free, I know that you've heard of Rescue, and that's an important cleaner because it does not only remove those scents and those negative pheromones, but also it does thoroughly disinfect. So that's a great one to definitely consider. Other things to consider are, what are some of those negative sounds that the pet may be experiencing? So for a lot of pets, and if you are at home right now at all with your dogs, you may have had that, where the barking of other dogs can be really, really stressful. So that can be a stressful situation when they hear that barking, or especially for, in those situations where they're multi-species boarding. As much as we can separate that, the better. And we do want to try and work towards having that quiet environment. So trying to minimize that barking and addressing that barking at its root cause. So for a lot of those pets, it's that frustration, or especially that stress related to just seeing things go past that frustration to being inside, and they get really stressed out. They may start barking. So really addressing it at its root cause. And we'll have some videos coming up where we show some examples of that. Another thing that we want to have is, you notice here too, and this is at North Idaho Animal Hospital. So right as soon as the pet comes in, having a little treat station. So one thing that people may say, and I've heard this before in boarding, is, well, we don't want to give the pet treats when they come in because there's that fear in some cases of a pet resource guarding, or there's that fear that, like, we want the pet to enjoy being here and not be so attached to their owner. And so a couple things to really address some of that is, first of all, when the pet is on leash and they are coming into the boarding facility or the vet hospital, that's the perfect time to be treating. And we also have them on leash. So, and when we are giving them their treats, if we're doing any of those games, like a find it game, we're doing that right in that pet's area with just them. So not other people or pets nearby. And also, if that pet does have an issue with resource guarding, that's something that we also want to be aware of. So that can give us a good opportunity to really discuss with them what that looks like for their pet, because that's something that would be very good to have a heads up on before a pet does stay with us. And also, when we think about having those positive associations, anything that pet experiences that's positive in that environment is really going to be associated with that whole environment, and it's really going to extend to that whole team. So it's almost like it's the more that the pet can get comfortable in that area, the more comfortable they're going to be in general, whether or not that pet parent is always with them. And eventually, as we'll talk about when we get into fun visits or happy visits and victory visits, those a lot of times are done with the pet owner, because the pet owner really is that pet safe base. So we want to ensure that they feel happy, they feel comfortable, they feel relaxed. And so definitely bypassing that fear that sometimes people have. And then you'll also see on the right-hand side, there's a noise monitor. And this is one that is at Indian Trails, the Fear Free certified practice up here in Spokane. And this is a great way that they can really monitor their own, the team can monitor their own talking. They can monitor some of the kennel noise. So things like that can be incredibly helpful, because sometimes we just get so used to different sounds that we may not even notice it. And so that's what I really encourage you to do, is to even have have it set up where you go into your facility in the perspective of you are a dog coming in, you're a client coming in. If you have a waiting area, attend to those sounds, videotape these things and see what are the pets responding to. So a lot of times pets can get really stressed and we may not even realize some of the sounds that they may be hearing, or some of the scents that maybe we need to, really attend to that more. And when we talk about scents too, another thing too is any of those vertical surfaces outside. If you have any stressed pets coming in, ideally we have nice and happy, but especially if you have a veterinary facility or a grooming facility that's attached to your boarding, we really do want to wipe down some of those vertical surfaces where the pets may be marking, because sometimes it may not always be that happy kind of marking. So wiping those down with something like Rescue that is going to thoroughly disinfect and remove that scent and those negative pheromones is really important. Another thing with this is we want to think about considered approach. So considered approach is really looking at how do we initiate contact with that pet. And here's an example of a pet that is really fearful. And a lot of times if we turn to the side, that's enough. But for this dog, as it can be for some dogs, when it's safe to do so, sometimes actually turning your back and having just barely your side profile showing, that can be really helpful for those dogs that are a little bit more intimidated. So I'm going to go ahead and show that here. Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice. You might actually be better with the accent out. He says otherwise it's so strange. It sounds so different. That's very nice. Very nice boy. So cute. Oh, still, she's not maybe I have some home. What a good boy.
Now he's actually coming up to you.
Oh, it's a boy. Yes. Yes. He's one of darkness.
So there you'll see a few things. So in that situation where I'm able to go back, I would love to have even softer treats that I can break up into even smaller pieces. For some of those dogs too, we can have things like a spreadable treat on the end of a serving spoon or on the end of a spatula. That can be really helpful. So that way we still have possession of it, which can be really helpful when we don't know with some of those dogs if they have any resource guarding tendencies. So we can have like that lickable cream cheese or peanut butter or that spray cheese, for instance, on the end of a serving spoon spatula, something like that. So that way we are pairing those positives, we're bringing them closer, but at a rate that they feel comfortable with. So you'll also notice with this dog here is, seeing how do they take treats better. So that's something you can kind of experiment with in the moment. So I noticed that a happy voice was more welcoming for this dog, but for some dogs, a happy voice isn't necessarily a good thing. That can be really stressful for them. So really paying attention to that pet in the moment. And here's another example of a situation where this dog was one that was adopted at Homer Pet Adoption, right there in Seattle area where I used to volunteer and help a lot of pets that had issues to be able to stay in their home. And this dog, for instance, would never come up to the guy in the household, like would run out of the room kind of scared. And so here in the facility, we're working on this and working on ways that he can, learn to approach his person. And so we were dropping some treats around, like a little treat trail and doing things like that. And also having the pet mom be able to treat the dog. So just for looking over at him, we're giving him treats. And then we're starting to build up that courage to being able to approach. And you'll still see though, that there is some conflict here. So you'll see the weight is still centered on the back legs. So still not entirely comfortable. So we may need to go back to rolling those treats, but this is a good example too of another way that we can have a less threatening approach. And remember, this dog would literally run out of the room normally with this guy. So those are some things that we can do. So having that rather than directly looking at the dog, turning to the side, that can be less threatening. He's sitting down on a chair, so he's less likely to move. So those are some easy strategies. But again, here this pet isn't entirely comfortable. So that's giving us some good information on our next steps. Our next step wouldn't be reaching out and directly putting on that leash or petting. We need to get that dog a lot more comfortable. And that's really where some of those happy visits and especially those victory visits will come in. And I know we talk about that a lot when it comes to veterinary visits, but I think it really can and should be utilized a lot more when it comes to boarding situations as well. So for a dog like the previous one, and for these two dogs, these are two pandemic puppies who had a very, very sheltered early existence and really only have been around their pet parents or two people that have ever touched them. Really, the dogs will immediately go into that fight or flight kind of mode. And it's really, really difficult for them to even go to the vet. And so one of the ways that we are helping them is, this is just a session where we worked on things like, getting them comfortable with the basket muzzle, for instance, which is a great skill for all dogs to have. It's one I work on with my dogs who haven't even ever shown any aggression at the vet or elsewhere towards people. It's just a really good skill and helps the dog to feel a lot more comfortable in a variety of situations. So we were working on that in this session and a couple other things. So when I first came in, these dogs were just barking like crazy and, running back. So doing that retreat, that flight, but then would come forward with the fight, were just a lot of those aggressive displays. And by the end, they were a lot more comfortable. And one of the ways that we helped them to be more comfortable was using what I like to refer to as communication cues, or they also are known as predictor cues. So giving the dog a heads up about what's going to happen before it happens and helping to minimize some of that stress. So in that situation, for instance, with the guy, one of the things that we could do, so whether the pet is staying in the home or you're moving around with them in the facility, sometimes giving them a heads up about what's going to happen. So sometimes it's the unknown that's super scary. So with these dogs, for instance, before we stood up, we want to make sure that pet is out of our space. So this is just a good habit really for everyone to get into and to be aware of, is moving that dog out of your space before you stand up or before you move, because that can be scary and it can be really threatening, especially if you go into that pet space. And even for those dogs that are more on the hyperactive side, when they're really in that highly aroused state, it can be easier for them to go, into that aggression when they're already really, really aroused. So that's where we want to just try and minimize those triggers. So here we're using a find it. So we're moving the dogs away from us rather than all of a sudden moving and standing up right with them beside you, which can be super scary when you have pets that are really, in that fight or flight mode. They're already in that survival kind of standpoint where anything can be somewhat perceived as a threat. So we're using find it. And then we're also starting to add in a communication cue before we move. So before we stand up, and normally I just use a cue like moving, but here we're using one that they already use in their family. So you'll hear that one used here since it was familiar already to them.
Okay, find it. Ready? Go get it. Go get it. Find it. Find it. So we find it. Let's go. A little away. I need to get up. Yep, so we'll see that. I'll toss some treats. So I want to pair that with like something good happening.
And I'll go ahead and put up a video too, when it comes to what those dogs were like beforehand. You will see it is a huge, huge change. So we actually got some physical contact, and one of the first people that's ever done that with them, and just for them to be comfortable enough to actually be taking treats. And a lot of that is just letting them know what's going to happen before it actually happens. And that's something that we can really start off with from the start with these dogs. Another thing is when we're starting to move dogs, when we're thinking about being able to move them throughout our facility, we want to ensure that our body is telling them the right thing. So when we're moving with the dog, a lot of dogs are going to do better if we keep our feet pointed in the direction that we want to go. So I think of this like I work with horses a lot. I love horses. And if I'm trying to get a horse to go into a stall, or we're trying to get a horse to go into a trailer, really keeping our body and our feet pointed in that direction, because that's giving a pet a different signal than if we are facing directly towards them, which for a lot of pets that can feel intimidating. And it's also giving that mixed message. It's telling the pet to stop with our body language when we're actually wanting them to go forward and to move in a different direction. So be aware of, a lot of times pets are going to do better if we keep our feet pointed in the direction that we want to go. And so if you've ever worked with horses, being aware of really treating it similarly with dogs. And it's something to try with your own pets too. And I would say that too, with caveat that some dogs are going to be more comfortable if we use that inviting body language. Maybe we, bend down slightly and we're more forward. But for those dogs, especially a little bit more fearful, that can be super intimidating. So being aware that where your feet go, usually the dog is going to go. So putting your feet, your body, your shoulders in that direction. And then we're using some treats or some other positive enticers to move that dog with us. So another thing is to also be aware of how we can use treats to guide a pet. So this is Debbie Martin's dog, and Debbie Martin was also in the last video. And here's an example of moving a fearful dog from the pet owner to go with the veterinary team. And this also applies to moving the pet throughout the facility. So this is a great strategy to practice, is even just practicing those nice leash handoffs to the team member. They can give that dog treats, move them through the facility, then they get to come right back. And a lot of times for those pets that are really fearful, the leash handoff is like, uh-oh, something bad's going to happen. So we want to get them used to whenever the leash handoff happens, maybe they get some treats and then we hand that leash right back. So for those dogs where that is a trigger, we just want to practice. Even that can be a super useful strategy, that we can hand off the leash and they get lots and lots of treats, and then they get to go right back to their person. So not every time that leash handoffs happens does that dog have to be taken away from their family, which for a lot of pets, that can be really stressful. So another thing is also looking at, with general control, remembering less is more. So here is an example with getting a dog out of a cage. And this is from our shelter certification and also was on boarding and daycare. So using treats to guide, letting the dog approach. So whenever possible, definitely encouraging that pet to come forward. That can be super helpful. And ideally allowing them to put their own head through that equipment. So another thing is also when it comes to picking up a pet, this might be something that we don't even really think about, is how we pick up a pet. And a lot of times for pet owners, when they go to pick up their cat or their dog, they are directly facing towards their dog. Their dog's body is directly facing towards them. I'm just going to show this really fast with let's see, we'll go and use Odie since he's right here. So for instance, say that this is, I'm going to pick up my dog. Let's see, I'm going to show this. There we go. So a lot of times people are going to go like this, and they're going to lift, which that's like really scary. You can see he's like, oh, I don't feel super comfortable with that. So instead of being directly facing them, instead, what we want to do, which that's even scary, even for my own dog, who I've worked with him a lot on handling. So instead we want to go alongside our dog. And ideally, we can even invite them up on us. So the more that we can encourage them to go with us, the better. And you'll see in this video. So another thing too is getting my body aligned alongside him. So just like where our feet go, the dog is going to go. I can use those treats to help distract him. Going to lift him. He's getting treats, and then we're moving versus directly facing towards him. So when we're facing towards him, that also can be, he wants back up. He's like, that was really fun. So a lot of times those are just some little changes that can make a huge difference. So rather than facing directly towards the dog when we go to pick them up, aligning up alongside them. And here's an example of Debbie Martin doing this with a dog in a vet hospital. So she's just using that, bringing the dog alongside her so she can help stabilize, giving those treats. So just an easy little change, and having that non-slip surface also up on the exam table, and same thing with grooming table. So ensuring that pet has a non-slip area. And we can also use gentle control tools too with pets. So here's an example of being able to do this with a small dog. And turn the volume just a little bit. So here she's using those nice treats. She's getting the leash on, and then she's going to actually use a big blanket to have more control over the dog in a way that's less stressful too. So for those pets that are kind of a bite risk or an unknown, how they'll respond, that can be really helpful. And just remember, everything is a learning experience. So pets are continually learning through every interaction. So that's where those treats are really important, or finding those things that pet really does like. So we'll go into some of the alternative rewards that we can sometimes use that can be useful. But whenever we can prevent that pet from experiencing fear, anxiety, and stress in that situation, that's really the ideal. So here, for instance, is an example of a pet that is more challenging to handle, and like how we would respond in that situation. So rather than, for instance, having to go directly in their pen, are there ways that we can help to minimize their exposure to that stressful trigger? And here's an example of how we might do that for both removing and then placing a bowl. So rather than having to go all the way in, considering, are there ways that we can just do this with just moving that kennel door, removing that out, rather than having to go all the way in? So just some really simple things. And I would add to this too. One thing that people don't really realize, and that I've become far more aware of in my time with Fear Free, is also looking at how we are shutting different kennel gates and doors. So a lot of times they're just click and shut, and it's that full on sound. If we can minimize that sound by just gently lifting and doing it that way, and then gently closing it, or get some of those soft shut systems, that can be really helpful. Or even the thing with like clipping on a harness, rather than clipping the harness or the collar, where, for instance, I'll just go ahead and show this with Otis's collar right here. So this is his tractive, by the way. So that's a GPS cellular device if you ever got lost. So a lot of times people are just outright clipping the collar. And while that may not seem like a big deal to us, that is a huge, huge deal when you have a fearful dog. So instead of doing the regular clipping, instead we can have our fingers right here. We're putting that through, and then it's quiet. So we can minimize that sound. And also, a lot of times putting that protective finger underneath so it doesn't clip their fur. So those little tiny, tiny changes can make such a big difference for a dog that is more reactive or is more prone to fear, and also preventing that pinching that can happen too. So here's an example when we talk about being able to reinforce some of that calmer behavior. But be aware, this is another one of those videos that's going to have quite a bit of barking. But here's an example of how we can use the treat ladder, or what the pet is really reinforced by, to help reduce some of that stress and help to reduce some of that kennel barking. So here's just the difference of the before and the after. And the longer part of the video shows the dogs up at the front of the kennel, spinning, barking, really loud, versus all of a sudden when a person approaches, they start to expect treats. Now, that can be a switch that we can do in different ways, like where we can also attend to a pet's allergies. So maybe we're using a type of treat that's also something that's more food-based. So I, for instance, really like some of those like freeze-dried lamb treats that are actually part of a dog's meal, or any of those freeze-dried treats that are a meal type of treat. That can be a really good one to use. Or for those pets that do have specific allergies, maybe that's where we're hanging something on the outside of their kennel where we can give them a treat specifically from there. But what we want to do is we want to have that positive anticipation, that happy expectation of what's going to happen when a person passes by. Because a lot of times, instead, what's happening is whenever a person passes by, it's that building frustration or that stress of, like, especially when there are other dogs passing by. And so it's that negative anticipation, which can build those negative emotions, build that fear, anxiety, and stress that escalates the reasons for that pet reacting, spinning, barking in the first place. So another thing too with this is also adding in enrichment. So we think of enrichment a lot in the home, but we don't always think of it in boarding. But wherever the pet is, whether it's at a daycare, boarding facility, if they're being boarded on their own, we want to think about enrichment and ways that we can make that happen. And so if we can do that at mealtime, or maybe there are specific times of day, and if for some pets, they may actually do better boarding with their buddy. And in those cases, maybe we do enrichment in a more creative way. So maybe they have that limited time of separation where they each get their own stuffed food puzzle, and then they're brought back together. So we can add in enrichment. And I would consider enrichment not just like a luxury, but really a vital need that so many places are really missing. And so, the more that we can add in enrichment, and there are so many ways that we can do that in a low cost way, really the better off these pets are going to be. So here's an example with Chandler. So Chandler was the dog you saw at the start, where she unfortunately came in that day and she was feeling incredibly stressed. I think she's been boarded for 2 weeks. And I think part of the problem was that there were a couple of really, really highly reactive dogs down at the other end of the kennel that really scared her. And so part of what we did with her is just helping her to feel more comfortable moving throughout the facility. And then when she's outside, getting her more comfortable out there. And for Chandler, as it can be with some dogs, her main thing is she just loved human attention. And unusual, because a lot of pets, they will have their own things, or maybe they get too distracted, but man, she just loved being pet, loved that sweet talk. So for her treat ladder, that human attention from people that she liked, that was way, way up on there. So I just want to show an example of how we use that to reward some of those calm behaviors, and those behaviors of really attending to us.
Can I stay? Good girl. Oh, what a good dog. Good job. Good job. You're such a good girl. Such a good girl. Yeah. Okay, go play. Chandler, stay. Nice. Good girl. Oh, you're such a good girl. You're such a good girl. You're so good. So good. What a good girl.
And Chandler loved to hide her head between your knees too. She was so sweet, one of the sweetest dogs. And so for her, having that right there in her medical emotional record, or in her emotional record at the facility, that she loves petting, she loves that sweet talk. So we can have those things put in there. And, maybe for some dogs too, we can get down to even things like, specific words that they might know, that we can put in their record too. And especially any cues, any known tricks, behaviors, those are all great ways we can interact with that dog in a way that they feel more comfortable with. And when it comes to, pets always continually learning, we want to look at what is that pet learning, and what are some ways we can reinforce that calm behavior, especially those pets that do get really amped up and overly active. That can be really helpful, but it's also helpful for those shy guys as well, because the more predictability they can have in their day, really the better. So here's an example with my friend Nikki Tassell, who helped to create the boarding and daycare program. And this is just showing one of the ways at Doggy Haven Resort where pets just ask for permission to be able to go in the play yard. And it's just as simple as just learning that they sit. And when they sit, that's their way of saying please.
Go, Maggie.
There's a little body block in there. Allow that one dog in. There was a German short-haired pointer one time that I was working with at a boarding and daycare facility. And this dog, it was really, really, really hard for him to pay attention to people. He just was all about the dogs, loved to play, but also was really, really intense. And one of the biggest things with him was, before he would even go in the play yard, the biggest thing was getting his attention back on us and so basically it's using what we call a pre-mac principle. So it's the concept, it's similar to, before you get your dessert, you need to eat your veggies first. So in order to go play with those dogs, that's what you really, really want to do. First of all, I just want you to do a behavior that really gets what I want in that moment, which is I want that attention back on me. And the more that I felt that attention back on me, the more I could get it in other situations, including when he started to play with other dogs. But for him, one of the biggest things that we did was, and that was really for him, it was like almost like this light bulb moment that like, oh, that's how I get what I want, which is to go play with those dogs, is just getting him to first of all just look back towards us. So working with him on just getting that subtle eye contact. So normally he'd be up at the front of the gate, just right there, barking, jumping, like you couldn't really get his focus at all. People just were not even in his, in his book. It was just all about these dogs he wanted to go play with. And for him, it was just initially just getting that eye contact, and then eventually being able to get him to hand target back towards us. And then eventually also getting more of those calm behaviors. So like that sit before we go in the play yard. So we can start off where that pet is able. So for that dog, for instance, getting a sit was pretty impossible because he was just so out of his mind excited, and the other dogs loved him too. So he was actually a really good player, but just really hard to kind of break through and get him to attend to people, which, that was definitely something that was necessary to have some good structure in the play yard. So just starting off with him, just giving that eye contact initially to the person, then getting that hand target, and then being able to ask for some of those more complicated behaviors later on. So when we talk about being able to help pets to be comfortable, we want to think about ways that they can start to associate that facility, that place, with good things happening. So we want to think of like happy visits or fun visits. And we think of this sometimes with the vet, but we don't always think about that when it comes to boarding. So here's an example of this little guy who is just terrified to go into North Idaho Animal Hospital, which is both boarding and also has grooming and all the veterinary care. And really the biggest thing for him was just coming by, as simple as his pet owner a few days a week coming by, going in, getting a treat, leaving, like started to make it comfortable, started to get him to where he would actually start taking treats from staff, where at first he wouldn't even go in the building. He eagerly is pulling her in there. And that's been the biggest thing with North Idaho Animal Hospital and a lot of the different places that I've trained at or have worked with them with boarding, is being able to have those happy visits, those fun visits. So that way, every time the pet comes in, something potentially negative from that pet's perspective isn't going to happen. So getting them really comfortable, where this almost can become like a second home for them.
There, she had a treat for you.
So right there, we're just up on the scale. So this dog, there's no way we could have gotten him on a scale initially. So, but the more that he came in and was getting those treats, that was awesome. And here's another dog. We're just literally there in the lobby and we're just giving some treats. So it can be as easy as that. So that's really a good start. Or for some pets, really even just starting off in the parking lot too. So when we look at fun visits, happy visits, those can be really helpful for getting that pet more comfortable. A lot of times that's more pet owner oriented. So where we are guiding them on, come in, we can maybe have some treat stations set up where they can move through. But a victory visit is a more direct visit where we are actually working through some of the issues with that pet parent. And maybe that's something that, if you don't have a partnering trainer with your facility, that you may want to think about, is getting a reward-based trainer who can work with your clients, or being able to work with them yourself. And so here's an example of a victory visit. And the difference between a happy visit or a fun visit and a victory visit is that a victory visit is far more structured, far more guided. A lot of times we have a staff member that's right there with that pet or with that pet parent, and we're working through different things. We're doing actual aspects of that visit. And so here's an example of being able to do this in grooming, but this is something similar that we can do in boarding as well. So getting them to go back in that kennel space, getting them comfortable. So the same concept would apply.
Right. And then just feed in there. That's beautiful. And just make that a great experience. So nice. So nice. And I'm going to very, very gently start sending it up. So the moment you see it start to move, we're just going to do little increments.
Good boy.
Really good. And he's just having a lovely little explore. That's fantastic. So he's going up, and the whole time you're just feeding him. So it just becomes a really easy experience. We're going to go slowly down, and the whole time the table's moving, just feed him. Great. Look at that dog go. That's beautiful. That bottom is just flopped over all the way. That's lovely. When you're ready, you can tell him to hop off. Straight away, you can hop him back up again. That's
Milo.
lovely.
Milo, hup. He's found
Nice to remember these. Watch and all the crap. That's it. And once he's finished hoovering, and again, it's a nice thing for him to get up and hoover. He's very relaxed. Body language is lovely. And when you feel that he's ready, you can cue him to get up again. That's great that he's hoovering. So he's having a lovely time. He's not in the mood to bolt out the door. He's perfectly happy to hang out.
I love that. So she's saying, it's okay if he's hoovering. So if he's vacuuming up, like we just want to pair really good things happening with being in the facility. So it doesn't even necessarily matter if the pet is doing all of these advanced behaviors. We just want to start pairing those happy, feel good experiences and helping to reduce that stress for that pet. So we have those really tasty treats. And we can also think about when it comes to victory visits, these don't have to be long sessions. So when at one facility in Seattle, for instance, we would have different victory visit workshops where we had 15-minute slots where dogs are signed up back to back. And in that situation, we had 3 different people in 3 different areas, so the pet can move from each station. So you may have something like that, or even just the pet coming in and, it's that 15-minute slot and we're going back into that kennel area and we're working with the pet there, or we're working with them in the lobby, or for some pets, it's out in the parking lot. So just getting them happy, comfortable, relaxed, and starting to have those people that they're really comfortable with. And when it comes to that too, be aware that really any kind of change can be stressful for pets, and especially pets that are more fearful and are definitely really attuned to those details. So some dogs that are fearful, I would say they are definitely very detail oriented in terms of like, if anything's changed, if anything's amiss, they really attend to that. So trying to keep things predictable, keeping them positive, and if we can, even having those assigned staff members that work with those specific dogs, or those are the ones that they get out each day. So things like that. So we can try and reduce that. And also, considering things that may trigger that pet. So trying to minimize, maybe some of those hats or some of those things that could be scary, some of those big bags. So we're trying to reduce those triggers and trying to also have something that the pet has that positive association with. So, if we all are wearing something similar, that can be helpful in the way of like, a similar uniform, for instance, that we might wear, or if there is that scary situation that maybe is a little bit more stressful, maybe that person is wearing something that's a little bit different. So ideally we try and minimize anything that is stressful, anything that is scary. And in those situations where we can't completely eliminate that positive, we want to make it different enough that it really stands out as totally different from the rest of the facility and the rest of the experiences that pet is going to have. So definitely trying to minimize that. And one thing that we've talked about, and this is a little bit of an aside, but I think it's important to kind of expand on that topic a little bit, is so not ever lying to the pet. So letting them know, okay, this is what's going to happen. And so one thing of our friend, Dr. Temple Grandin has talked to us about is like making everything really seem somewhat different for that pet, enough that they can, because say that something negative happens in exam room 1, for instance, that pet is always going to remember that scary experience in that room. This is where it happened. This is what the person was wearing. Like they can be very, very specific, and there may be a specific thing they hone in on. And so, having each exam room set up slightly different can be really helpful. And I would say the same thing with some of the places where the pet stays. If they've ever had a scary experience, or for those pets, like I know a lot of boarding facilities, daycare, you're going to get pets with separation anxiety as they're being treated for some of those issues. If they've had a negative experience, like a dog Milo that I was working with that had really bad separation anxiety, and actually one of the first times when I was working with him actually chewed through the side of the whole pin that he was in and had really bad splinters in his gums. It was just quite the awful event. And so for him, having him boarded in a different part of the facility in the future, he was definitely, worked with a veterinarian that was able to put him on some medication to go along with the training program that we did. But we would never want to put him back in that space where he had that really scary situation happen. So being aware of that and being able to track that, and also for those pets, when they have those really great experiences, we want to just, and if we're having to come in for victory visits, maybe we're working in a specific space that then can be their space that they end up staying in. So really tracking those things can be a helpful thing to consider. So when we look at, so one more thing with that too, I I had a little bit of a squirrel moment there, but circling back one more time. So say that we ever do have that situation where something scary does happen, something we can't avoid. I know that, like, for instance, at one of the facilities I worked with, someone had a really bad medical event, and it was very distressing to these dogs who were in the play yard with this person when it happened. And because of that, a lot of the pets actually got in a fight. It was this horrible escalation that I came in on, and this is far before Fear Free, by the way. But in that situation where the pets really needed, to be taken into the vet, a lot of them needed bathed because they had blood on them. Like, it was just blood from the person where that happened. That's a horrible traumatic event, really, for the people, for the pets. And in that situation, like, sometimes just stuff happens sometimes. And so if it ever does happen, consider what are some ways we can make this different than anything else this pet's going to experience. So, even doing something like putting on different clothes before we take that pet out to have to give them that bath, for instance, or the pet that gets sprayed by a skunk. If we have to bathe them, sometimes that pet may not be ready for a bath. Maybe that's a really scary situation. Maybe we put on different clothing. We fix our hair in a different way. Maybe we put on a hat. So something that makes us look different, or we take them in that different room. So that way we don't taint the whole facility. We don't taint everything that's associated with that, especially when we've built upon all of those positives for that pet. So just want to explain that a little bit more. So we're trying to have all the positives that we can. And if in those situations where we can't avoid those negatives, we really want to make that seem different enough for that pet that it really doesn't taint that whole facility. So another thing that we can think about when it comes to victory visits and also just pets coming in is being able to reinforce just those initial lookovers. So just reinforce that pet for calmly looking over at that person or that stressor, that trigger, and we can reinforce that. And here's an example with another pandemic puppy, Marvin, a little long-haired Chihuahua who was very, very upset with new people and had very select friends. And so this is just getting him comfortable. And right before this, by the way, he was barking pretty incessantly, which I have some videos of that you can always look at later too.
So the other thing I want you to practice with me right now is every time he looks over at me, if he just looks over, has that quiet mouth, ideally those ears forward, I want you to reward him. Those pick up. Good, nicer. They're good. Perfect. Good. There. So good. Good job. Good. There we go. Good. Moment to reward. Very good. He's really smart, I can tell. He knows when he's naughty. It's good right there. That was awesome. That was really good. That's awesome. So he's starting to actually do that on his own, where he's like looking over at me and then he's like checking back in with you. He's like, oh, I get a reward for that. I'm just gonna move a little bit. It's right there. It's good.
So for him, for us, that may feel like it's like paint drying that we're watching because it's like, man, this is so slow. Like, can't we move faster? For dogs like Marvin, earning their trust is so important. And part of that is moving really slow. So all we're doing is we are rewarding him for looking over. I'm trying to not move at the very start as he's getting more comfortable. I'm starting to add in just little bits of movement, and I'm just she's just reinforcing him for looking over. So again, this is where the pet owner can really be involved. So we can do those victory visits where the pet comes in, there's no pressure on them. We are, a lot of times even playing hard to get with that pet. So we are looking away. We're not moving into that pet space as much as possible. And so that's a great thing that we can do during some of those victory visits with them, is just practicing some of that looking over and really reinforcing that. So that's a really great exercise, and we can use that in other situations as well, which this also includes with reactive dogs. And there's going to be a reactive dog webinar coming up on October 10th that I will be teaching, and we'll have a lot more in there about reactive dogs, which really also goes into some of those dogs that maybe are more in that big feelings club, that are more boisterous, and we'll have a lot more strategies and in-depth on how to do that. But here are some good examples, and these are really behaviors that we can work on right there at the boarding facility. So here's Quimby, who she too was kind of gotten during the time of the pandemic, or is it starting to get a little bit better, but still, you know, a lot, you know, not a ton of socialization before we got her. And so she definitely, you know, was very reactive to other people. And so all we're doing here is we are just pulling into a parking lot. We're doing this right here at Walmart, but this is something some of you can actually do right there at the boarding facility with them, or at daycare, at the vet hospitals, getting them comfortable in their space and just reinforcing that calm behavior like this. Good girl.
Oh, that's so nice. You've done so good. Yes.
And for her, that is huge progress, because Quimby normally is the type that will just sit in the car and bark and bark and bark. And people think, oh, that's just a dog, you know, it's just a small dog thing or a yappy dog thing. But really, she's doing it because she's very, very stressed. She has a high level of FAS, and especially with new people. So we want to get her nice and comfortable. And so at the end, that was just watching people pass by with the back of the car closed. That may be a starting place for some dogs. So being able to guide people on how to do that, and being able to even practice that, you know, when we are working with some of these dogs. Sometimes, as I mentioned, sometimes, you know, in the ideal world, we have a certain way we want things to go, but sometimes, you know, the real world catches up with us and we get in a situation that may feel over our head or over that dog's head, and maybe they are upset. Maybe those people are coming too close. It's too much for them. So how do we respond when that pet is starting to react? And I want to show that again with Quimby, and some ways that we can just gently guide them away from that unwanted behavior and help to reinforce that calm behavior again. That was her before.
Good. Just looking outside. There are people going by. Hey, buddy. Right here. You say? Good girl. Good. Right here. Come here. Right here. Good job. Very good. Touch. Okay. She's doing so good. Right here. Good girl. Very good. Right here. Right here. Come here. Good girl. Good. Good. Very nice. Right here. Bunny. Right here. Bunny. Good girl.
So trying to really redirect their attention back. So whenever she's starting to escalate, I can get her attention back towards me. I can really reinforce that. And instead of ever punishing them, so we want to try and avoid that punishment, any of those corrections, we can instead use that interruption. So that gentle interruption, something that just gets her attention, but without scaring them. So right there, it was just like kind of tapping on the dash or tapping on the middle console, and then, redirecting her back. And for her also, for some dogs, we can just go ahead and start with reinforcing them for turning back towards us. But as they get more advanced, we may ask them to do something else before we reward them. So another couple of things here that I do want to show are a couple of other ways that we can get a pet to approach us.
Treat on the inside of your hand if you want, and then just go ahead and have that treat on the inside of your hand. Have your hand closed and just put it out in front of his nose. As soon as his nose touches it, go ahead, and then go ahead and open up and give him a treat.
So this is teaching a hand target.
And I'm gonna have you put that in front of his nose. Good, and then go ahead and give him that treat. Good job, Bob. Perfect. What we want to do is we want to have the one hand be your hand target hand, the other one you can reach in and grab a reward, or just have that treat in your other hand to give him. Okay. What we're going to do is we're just going to put that empty hand in front of him, and as soon as he does, good job, Bobby. And then go ahead and give him that treat from the other hand. Yeah, perfect. Good job. That was awesome.
So again, I'm going to have that video online so you can find more on how to teach that. But I just want to give that as a great example. And a hand target is really a good standard behavior that really every dog that you work with, it would be ideal if they have. And so it's something that we can teach them fairly quickly when they come to stay with us. And so again, I will have resources on how you can teach that. And this is another really important one that I really advocate for now, is being able to teach a chest to a hand target, because sometimes that nose to hand, that's a great way to move them throughout the facility, get them to say hi. But if we ever have to initiate that handling and that physical touch, it can be really difficult to go from one to the other. So this is a way that we can teach the dog moving in towards us, where we can start that touch gradient on an area that pet is more comfortable with, so their chest or their shoulder. And here's a little bit on how to train that.
I think I do too is sometimes I will
and I had never touched
this hand, and so
this dog before.
Sometimes he just moves into it. Right. Boy. Good choice.
And Finn was very aggressive too, with people handling him, and had multiple bites before.
Then he has the choice of to come back. Yeah, and that can be helpful. Sometimes we can put too much pressure on them, and if they get uncomfortable, then they sometimes don't know what to do. So if we teach them to back away, willingly, it helps them practice that exit. It makes it a lot easier. Good boy, yes, it's worked all the time. Okay.
So again, always tossing that treat out too, so we give them that ability to move away if they're uncomfortable.
Very nice. What? Ready? Okay. Good boy. And he's very aware of his body space, and a lot of dogs aren't. So that's why I don't want to move too far too fast with him. So I definitely think him making that initial contact, that's kind of the point he's comfortable with right now. Yeah,
Because he's super lovey.
And he got a lot more comfortable. Here's an example of this a little bit later with him and how that was used. Let's see.
Yes.
So that's it once it's trained. So he moves his chest into the hand. And similar to the hand target, it's one that we can work with dogs on and get them really comfortable and relaxed with. So that's a great one during victory visits, during their stay.
Yes. Good boy. That is so nice. Really nice. Really pet. Really good.
So we're using a communication cue there of pet.
Yes.
So he has that choice if he wants to make contact or not.
Yeah. Good boy. That's so nice. That is so nice, man. Yes, he is a good boy. Okay, good pet. Good job. There you go. Left. Good job, buddy.
And that was really huge for Finn, because really he had been one of those dogs that was really hard to ever get hands on him, and he had multiple bites as mentioned. So that was huge progress. So for him and dogs that are really human select or very touch adverse, having a way that they can initiate that contact, and then also being able to use that communication cue. So just like the cue of moving or standing up or getting up that we might use, we can use that cue like pet. And so I was having the pet parent work separately with him with saying that word pet as she pets. And then every once in a while, she's bringing in that tasty treat reward. So starting to pair that with the positive. And for Finn, he may not always love other people petting him. It's definitely, he's very, very sensitive dog, but at least he got a lot more comfortable and he has the ability to always move away. So he always has that choice, and giving pets those choices are really important. So here's an example, and our last example for today, of how to do this in the facility. So here's an example of actually doing a victory visit in hospital.
Good boy. Here we go. Hey, can I do that? Oh,
I love that this checks the
so good.
hand target.
That's yeah. And very good. Go. Run your check. Good job. Very good. Check. Good job. That's really good. Okay, can you do this?
So it might be a little much for him. So I think we switched over.
I'm gonna treat this for you coming closer. You can just a little step. That's perfect. Okay.
Then we moved it out of the hand. That was a little much for him.
There we go. You're a good boy. Oh, take your hand. So nice not to kiss it. Sorry, did you say something? I had this in my ears and I told you I said that's the closest he's ever been to stethoscope in his life. Good. He's doing great on that. Yeah. See, let me check. Good job, buddy. There we go. Good boy. That's so nice. That's really good. Check. Treat. Good job, bud. You're so cute. Okay, can I do less? Treat. Good boy. Treat. Good job, buddy. I know he's never heard you. Yeah, he's so good. Really so good. Oh, Finn, thank you so much. I miss you. I miss you so much. I know it.
So sorry, I have one more video. I forgot about this. But I do think that this is an important one. So thank you for sticking around with me. And again, there are lots of other resources that I'll have up where you can watch the full version of this. But one other thing we want to think about is, beware of that poison cue. So we've talked a little bit about how certain things, like a certain area, could be associated with something scary or negative happening, but we don't always think about the things that we think are positive and how that can also become a poison cue for that pet. And for me, a good example of this are flowers. So you think, oh, when you get flowers, that's a happy, feel-good thing. Not always. Like for me, I would say whenever I've gotten flowers in the past in bad relationships, something really bad usually happened or was going to happen, or I was going to find out something. So for anybody else who's ever been in one of those toxic relationships, you probably know what I'm talking about, and you maybe have your own type of poison cue. But whenever I would get flowers, it's like, oh no, get kind of that sick feeling. Well, same thing can happen with pets. And you'll see this with things like, especially when we're using food distraction. So whenever the peanut butter comes out or whenever certain treats come out, it's like, uh-oh, the dog's like, something bad's going to happen. So be aware of ways that pets may have poison cues that they're attending to. So here's an example of how we may move away from that food distraction to a more touch equals treat. and really attending to that pet stress signal. So in this situation, were I to keep going forward with the handling and trying to do the eye drops with the distraction present, that's a situation where that peanut butter, for instance, may become a poison cue. So we want to instead really ensure that we are keeping those stress levels low. And for a lot of pets, moving away from distractions, when you start to see signs of avoidance, and actually going more to that touch equals treat and breaking that process into smaller steps so we can reinforce them for, which also allows us to adjust more easily to some of those early signs of FAS. So here's an example of this with Otis here. So using some touch gradient, moving up towards him, having that food distraction up higher, which would help with the eye drops, but he's pausing in his eating, so that's showing me he's not comfortable. So we're going to instead go to touch equals treat. So there's a communication cue right there. So saying drop right before I drop that grip on his neck. Give him a treat. Just get him comfortable with that sensation.
Okay. You're feeling good? Yes, he's paying. Good job, baby. Hang on to me. He's being good boys. Yeah, you do good. Burp. See you to burp. Oh, good. Very nice.
So using that communication cue and drop before actually squeezing any of the liquid out. And so also squeezing that right in the corner of his eye too, which then we can roll it into the rest of the eye. So rather than it going directly on the eye, we can put it right in the corner of their eye on the skin and then allow their head to just, as we roll their head, that liquid will go in. So that can be less of a startle and surprise for them too. So those communication cues are really important. And also, hopefully we can help to turn around some of those poison cues for them, just like has happened for me. I now like flowers a lot more. It's not such a poison cue for me. And that's really how we want it to be with pets in our care too. So that way we can use those food distractions in a way that's actually going to be able to help them. And we can use the food treats in a way that we can use that touch equals treat for those pets that really have that suspicion or that anxiety whenever that food comes out, that we can help them to feel more comfortable in it in that step-by-step manner. So following this, there's going to be a lot of really great resources that we will be sending in follow-up. So I have a couple of handouts that I'm going to be sending to you, and also put up a lot of these videos up on YouTube so you can see more of like the full actual videos. And I do hope that you'll join for the October 10th Dealing with Difficult Dogs, the dog reactivity webinar, which is going to have even more on this. And my email is right here too. So if you have any follow-up questions, I would love to be able to help you out, and I can answer. And Nick, I'm not sure if we have time for questions, but I'm around as long as needed. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mikkel, for a great presentation. I'm having a little bit of internet difficulty, so I'm going to keep my camera off for the Q&A section, but we do have time for just a few questions. There are quite a few in, but just to be mindful of everyone's time, I think we'll only have time for a couple. First one that I saw quite a few times was people wondering if you have any suggestions for dogs who aren't very treat motivated, if there are any alternative options. Regarding
so for sure. Yeah, so great question. So definitely thinking of like, what does that pet really want in that moment? And so for some dogs, it can be that the play yard for when it's a daycare, or maybe it's getting to go through that door, or it's going out, for those dogs that are in boarding, we're taking them out on a walk. It's going out from the kennel and walking out, or going into that yard. So thinking about those things, but also thinking about ways that we can utilize some of their regular food as part of our training too. And so, in some regard, we can do things like, having like a lot of times I'll use like those food rolls and cut it up into small pieces and freeze it. So it's really easy to utilize. And those can be some really good treats. So a lot of times we're using higher value treats. So sometimes we may switch up what kind of treats that we're using, but also using what really works for that pet in that moment. So a lot of times it can be, sometimes it is, those life rewards. For some pets, it is really that petting. But a lot of times the reason why they aren't taking those treats may be that they have higher levels of fear, anxiety, and stress. So really addressing those. And in some cases, that may be also adding in some nutraceutical, pharmaceutical medication on board to help them be at a low enough stress level that they can still take treats. Or in some cases, some pets maybe do better in a certain type of boarding facility, or even in the home. So in some cases, it's, really helping the pet parent to know, okay, this is a good fit, or in some cases it may not be a great fit, and that's okay. I think it's also part of Fear Free is also recognizing when a situation is too much for that pet and really is going to be too much for those other dogs too. And I think one thing that I see a lot in daycare situations, for instance, are those dogs that really they are anxious, they're stressed out with other dogs, but they're still brought in anyways. And that can do so much damage for not only that pet, but also for other dogs nearby too, because they, there can be a lot of potential for altercations, for fights to happen in that situation if that pet is really pressed against the wall and is pushed to that point that they have to kind of lash out to defend themselves. That's not fun for the other dogs either. So, and in some cases, it's really doing what's best for everyone involved when we do find those better fits if that pet is just way too stressed out in that situation. But the victory visits and those fun, happy visits can really help a lot with getting that pet more comfortable in that space and with specific people.
That makes sense. Thank you so much, Mikkel. One more question from Shannon. How do you deal with FAS with the car, including car rides or car sickness?
Oh, such a good question too. So that's the big one. And especially if the pet's already coming in really stressed out, it can make it really difficult for us. So one thing we can do is, breaking that situation down in the way that we may do something like giving that pet a familiar, safe space. So having a pet bed, getting them used to that kennel that's going to be used in the car, or that harness. So giving them that familiar area. We can feed them their meals in that area. We can walk them out to the car, get them in the car, get lots of treats, then we get back out. So we're breaking that down. Things like serenia, for instance, a lot of pets that have that anxiety in the car also get motion sick. So it may make them feel just nauseous. And so it's another negative association that escalates that situation further. So in some cases, working with that pet's vet to see if there is that component of motion sickness, and if something like serenia might be helpful for them. And also just doing those little short trips. So for instance, with some of the dogs that I've had that do have that motion sickness, or that get really anxious in the car, it is doing things like breaking down that situation where we just turn on the car ignition, we're giving them treats, and then we turn it off. And also, we're going to go over to the barista stand, we're going to get some treats, we're coming right back. So a lot of times when pets get in the car, they may associate it with really long car rides, with going on the freeway, with going places that are scary. So we want to ensure that they have a ton of really happy experiences in the car, and they're going to good, fun places. So even just taking them on a short drive and then we're going on a walk, that can be really helpful for breaking up that negative association for that pet.
Great, thank you. And then we have a question here from, let's see. Looks like we have a question about how this can apply to pet sitters and dog walkers, specifically, perhaps when these professionals are coming into the home. Is there anything they can do to help pets feel more comfortable that way?
Absolutely. So definitely encourage taking the pet sitter course. There's a ton in there on that. And if you haven't already taken it, but really we can do the victory visits, those fun, happy visits with us coming over to the home too. So when we're coming over, we're just doing things like, a lot of times too, is having those pets meet us outside of the home. So having the pet parent bring the pet out on leash, and maybe we meet them in a more neutral space and then walk back in together. A lot of times those pets can be more defensive in those areas that are just really high tension areas, like the front door. So in those situations, maybe we meet them outside, or rather than ringing the doorbell, maybe we text them a heads up like, hey, I'm here. So we can help to reduce some of those stressors, those triggers that cause them to go in that really high escalation state. And then we can do things like coming over, just giving them some treats. Maybe we're sitting down, we are playing hard to get, letting the pet approach us, we're tossing them those treats, and then we leave. So these really short, happy sessions, and those are things that we can charge for as well. And a lot of times people that have pets that are really shy, or that are really more fearful, or those pets that are really amped up and just a little bit hard to handle, this is something that when we explain what we're doing and why, a lot of times pet parents are really invested in this, because they know how difficult it is to find a place that can watch their dog, and a place that's comfortable, and people that are comfortable, and they want their pet to feel comfortable and relaxed. So, explaining to them, these are some ways that we're helping your pet to get more comfortable, get them more relaxed, and helping us to build that relationship before I care for them. And so I would say those victory visits are really important to do in the home as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mikkel. We're a bit over time, and I want to be conscious of everyone's time today. So once again, thank you, Mikkel, and thank you to our friends at Virox for making today's presentation possible. As a thank you for attending, attendees can use the code FINESSE20 for 20% off your fear-free membership or renewal. Everyone will be receiving a follow-up email who attended today with that coupon code as well. So be on the lookout for that. And then once again, thank you everyone for joining our webinar today. Be sure to follow us on social media at Fear-Free Pets. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at fearfreepets.com for invitations to future presentations. We hope you all have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you next time.